Hello and welcome back to Tanya. We're continuing with chapter 19. So, on the theme of this very special nature of the Jewish soul, which is to believe in God and to give itself over to God, we are, even if it, as we said in the previous chapter, even if it requires giving himself away to be killed or to be burnt and so on, nevertheless, he will be committed to God to that extent. We're going to expand on this idea now in chapter 19. Perek Yutet, chapter 19, so to increase our explanation, we have to explain well, what it says in the verse in Psalms, Ner Havaya Nishmat Adam. The candle of God is the soul of the man, of Adam. Pirush Yisrael Kroim Adam. The Jewish people, which are called Adam, Nishmatam hi the Mashal Ka'or HaNer. Their souls, the souls of the Jewish people, are like, for example, a light of a candle. What does the light of a candle do? That it flickers constantly upward naturally. That is what it does by nature. And we're going to define in a minute or so what nature means. להיפרד מהפתילה ולהידבק בשורשו למעלה, ביסוד האש הכללי, שתחת גלגל הירח, כמו שכתוב בעץ חיים. Because the light of the candle is doing this because the light of the fire desires naturally to separate itself from the wick and to attach itself in its source above, which the source of fire, of the element of fire in this world, where does all the fire in this world come from? It comes from the element of fire that is general under the sphere of the moon, as it is explained in the works of the Eitz Chaim. In other words, the fire is going upward. It's flickering upward. Why? Toward where? Toward its source. וגם, ואף שעל ידי זה יכפה ולא יאיר כלום למטה, וגם למעלה בשורשו, יתפתל אור במציאות בשורשו, אף על פי כן בכך הוא חפץ בטיבו. Now, even though through this, the fire of the candle will be extinguished and will not light at all below in this world. That means that as soon as the fire of the candle goes up above to its source, it ceases to exist. It becomes absorbed in the much greater fire above. And even above as well, in its source, its light will become nullified. The existence of it will be nullified in its source. But nevertheless, that is what the fire, the light of the fire, desires in its nature. Even though it wants to go to its source, because its source is where it can get more fire from, it can feed off of it, but it going into its source will cause it to cease to exist. So really it doesn't make sense. And it has this flickering this tendency or this nature only as a desire, as a nature. So that is a example to explain Kach nishmata Adam. So too the soul of man, or as we said, the Jew, v'chen bechinat ruach v'nefesh. And this includes the various levels of the soul, like the ruach and the nefesh. Chefza v'cheshka, desires and yearns, betiva, naturally, liparet v'latzet min haguf, to separate and to leave the body. Ulidabek, so the body would be like the wick, and the soul is like the flame. And just as the flame wants to leave the wick, the soul wants to leave the body naturally. It's a natural feeling. Vilidabek, and where does it want to go? And attach itself in its source, which is in God, the source of life, blessed be He. Now, that makes a lot of sense. It wants to go to God because He's the source of life. It wants more life. However, hagam shetiye ein ve'efes ותתפתל שם במציאות לגמרי, ולא יישאר ממנה מאומה ממהותה ועצמות הראשון, even though that it will, if the soul actually goes to its source, to God, what's going to happen to that soul? The soul's not going to have its own feet to stand on. What's going to happen? It will be nullified, nullified over there. It's in existence completely. Its existence will be completely nullified. And none of it at all will remain from its original existence. Now, even though the truth is that it will be nullified, that is its desire and yearning in its nature. Naturally. And this nature, what is the definition of teva in Hebrew or in English, nature? The definition is a name for anything that is not according to logic and reasoning. V'gam kan, so that's in general, that's what nature means. Something that does not have, that is above logic. V'gam kan, also here, hakavana, the meaning is, shiratzon b'chefetz ze b'nefesh, eino b'bechinatam v'dat v'sechel musa gemuvan, that this desire and yearning of the soul is not logical and understood in the mind. Rather, it is above the knowledge and mind that can be understood. As we said, it will be extinguished by doing that. It's completely illogical for the soul to want to go to its source because it will be nullified. But nevertheless, it does that. It's something above logic. It's something that cannot be understood. And now this is the famous, what we've spoken about last chapter, level called the chachma in the soul. The chachma is the level in the soul where within dwells the infinite light, blessed be He. Or the light of the infinite one, blessed be He. And as we explained before, that this is the level which is touching the core of the soul of the Jew, which wants to constantly cleave to God. And it is completely nullified to God's presence whatsoever. And because it's completely nullified and open, therefore God can actually come into it. Because the greater something is, the lower it has to dwell. It's like Moshe, who because he specifically was famously the most humble man on earth, therefore, he spoke to God like a man knows his friend. That's how much access he had to God, because he was so nullified. This level of Chachma, which is found in every single Jew, is that point where that soul is nullified before God and therefore has access to God, and God comes into it. וזהו כלל בכל סדחה דקדושה, שאינו אלא מה שנמשך מחוכמה, שנקרא קודש העליון, הבטל במציאות באופן סוף, ברוך הוא המלוא בשמו, ואינו דבר בפני עצמו כנזכוך לעיל. This is a rule for anything that is in the side of holiness, right? There's the side of holiness, and then there's the side of impurities. So anything, any level, anything from the side of holiness has a source, which is called Chachma. It comes from Chachma, and it is called the higher level of holiness, which is, as we just said, nullified in its entirety in the light of the Infinite One, blessed be He, which is, therefore, because it's nullified, revealed in it, and it is, because it's completely nullified, it doesn't have its own existence, it doesn't have an ego, this level. Specifically because it doesn't have an ego, therefore, it can open itself up to things, and the greatest thing, to God. ולכן נקרא כוח מה, and therefore it is called the ability of ma, the ability of humility, of nullification. והוא הפך ממש מבחינת הקליפה, and it is this level of chachma, which represents humility, is the exact opposite of the side and realm of klipa, of the impurities which conceal godliness. B'sidcha achora, and the other side, shemimena nefashot umot ha'olam, that from that side come the souls of the nations of the world. And of course there are exceptions. However, for more information, see chapter 1 and other places as well. That the souls of the nations of the world serve for their own benefit. It could be, by the way, a Jew's the same way, but we're not going into that right now. But that is in general. And they say, give. It's all about what am I gaining out of it. And as Asaph said, feed me. It's all about me. It's serving myself. And that is the other side. To become a self-ego, an existence, as we mentioned earlier, chapter 6 and other places. The opposite of the level of Chachma, which is complete nullification and humility. Putting himself inside and worshiping God. One is worshiping God, which is Chachma, and one is worshiping the self, and that is the side of impurities. And therefore, those negative energies are called dead. Because the level of Chachma will give life. And it says, they will die, and not with Chachma. These are verses. And that is teaching us, those verses are teaching us that anything connected to Chachma has life, is considered alive. And anything that is not, that does not have any relation to Chachma, like the negative energies, as they serve themselves, that they are considered dead. And yeah. V'chen ha'reshaim. Now we're going to go into it a little bit. Now we're digging a little bit deeper. V'chen ha'reshaim u'poshei Yisrael kodem sheba'u lidei nisayon lekadesh Hashem. So too the wicked and the sinners of Israel, before they came to a test of sanctifying God, sanctifying the name of God, which obviously, like is famous, means sacrificing one's life for the sake of God. See the Rambam Laws of the Foundations of the Torah, chapter 5. Ki bechinat ha'chochma shebenefesh ha'elohit im nitzotzelhut me'or ensof baruch hu ha'melu b'hashpa'ah and bebchinat gadlut begufam benefesh ha'behamit. Now, why is a sinner of the Jewish people the same as a non-Jew, where in the sense that they are considered dead? They don't have a revelation of God. They don't have a humility and a nullification to God and are self-serving. Because this level of Chachma, which represents humility, in their soul, in the godly soul, together with the godly spark from the light of the Infinite One, blessed be He, which is enclosed in the Chachma, are in a state of exile in their soul, in their bodies, and in the animal soul. In other words, that spark of Chachma is exiled within them. It's suppressed and concealed. Mitzad haklipa shebechalel hasmoli shebalev hamolechet uboshelet bekufam besod galot hashchina kadeis koch leil. Because of, due to the fact that you have the impurity. Where is that impurity? In the left side of the heart, which goes about and rules their body. And that is the meaning of the exile of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence, as we explained in chapter 17. So now, because the impurities conceal their soul, therefore, nikhat ahavazu benefesh ha'elohit shechotzona v'chevtza l'davek b'Hashem chaye chaim baruch hu b'shem ava mesutechet. The love of the godly soul, which has a desire and yearning to attach itself to Hashem, the source of life, blessed be He, is called the hidden love. And as we've referred to in the past, and we will refer to in the future. Why? It is concealed and covered up in a sackcloth of the klipa, of impurity, in the sinners of Israel. And from this klipa that's concealing the godly soul, it comes into them a spirit of folly to sin. As the sages say, a person doesn't sin unless a spirit of folly overcomes him. As we learned in the past, I believe chapter 12, if I'm not mistaken. See there. Shegalut haze libchinat chochma eino ela libchinat hamitpashetet mimena benefesh kula lehachiota. Okay, so now there's a difference over here. in what sense are the sinners of Israel still, is their soul still alive? In what sense is their soul still alive? As follows. This exiling of the level of chachma of their soul is only the extension of that level that gives life to the entirety of their soul. The thoughts of the soul, the emotions of the soul, the thought, speech, and action of the soul, those are all extensions of this level of chachma. And when it is in exile, these levels are in exile too. אבל שורש ועיקר של בחינת חוכמה שבנפש האלוהית הוא במוחין, ואינה מתלבשת בלבוש שק דקליפה שבלב, בחלל השמאלי, בבחינת קלות ממש. However, the source and the rooting of the level of the chachma in the godly soul is in where? In the mind, in the intellect. And it does not come out into the sackcloth of impurities, which is in the heart of the left side of the heart, in a form of exile, literally. That means that the level of chachma remains in the mind intact. The godly soul's level of chachma in the mind stays intact and does not go into exile. Only the lower levels after the mind go into exile, like the heart, the emotions, thought, speech, and action. But in the level of chachma in the mind stays intact. It's alive. Okay, so that is in general. When the extensions of chachma are in exile, there's an exception, or one of many exceptions perhaps. When they come to a test, these are referring to the sinners of Israel, as we said. They come to a test when it comes to something regarding their faith. So I think these words are very, obviously chosen very well, but I think we can just take a lot from the choice of words over here. So let's listen closely to what this means, yeah? This matter of faith is above logic and touches the very soul up till the level of chachma within it. Azai hineora mishenata. Then it awakens from its sleep. Upoelet peulata bekoach Hashem hamelubash ba. And it does its doing with the power of Hashem, which is enclosed in it. As we said, Hashem dwells in the level of chachma. So with that power from Hashem, it does its doing. What that means is we're about to explain, but essentially what we're saying is a test of faith will, in some cases at least, wake up that sleeping soul that is deep inside. Even if it's a sinner, still, through a test of faith, their soul will wake up. As it says, V'yikatz kiyashin havaya, and God, Havaya, the name of Havaya, woke up from sleep, or like a sleeper, which is referring to the soul. La'amod b'nisayon be'emunat Hashem, bli shum tam v'dat v'sechel musag lo. To stand in a test of faith in Hashem without any logic and knowledge and understanding to Him. It's completely above His understanding. It's completely above His nature. He'll give Himself to be killed which is completely illogical, in order not to give up his faith, that's illogical. And now that comes from the soul. To overcome the impurities and desires of this world, whether they're permitted desires, which if they're selfish, they're problematic, see chapter 6, and also forbidden desires, which are obviously forbidden, that he's been accustomed to, and to despise those impurities, and for him to choose God as his portion and his lot, to give away to God his soul, al kedushat shemo, on the sanctification of his name, ve'af ki haklipot gavru alav kol yamav, and even though the impurities have overpowered over him his whole life, velo yachol lahem, so much so that he's unable to combat them. As the sages say, the wicked are in the domain of the heart. The heart rules those wicked people. Nevertheless, when he comes to a test of a matter of faith in the one God, whose foundation is the holy heights, referring to the level of chachma in the godly soul, within which lies or dwells the light of the infinite one, blessed be he. So when it comes to a test like that, all impurities are nullified entirely. It's actually, just in parentheses, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that is the language, the text used when we destroy our chametz before Pesach. I believe we use those words, but I could be wrong. Okay, moving forward. And they become as if they were never existent, literally in front of Hashem. Kedichtiv, as it says in the verse, Kol hagoyim ka'ai negdo gomer. All nations are like nothing in front of him. Uchtiv kihine oivecha havaya, and it says, behold, here are your enemies, God. Kihine oivecha yovedu yitpachdu vegomer. Here, behold, your enemies will be destroyed and dispersed, all those that do sins. Uktiv, and as it says in another verse, Kahamas doneg b'prei esh yovedu vegomer. And as wax melts in front of fire, they will be destroyed. Uktiv harim kadoneg lamasu, and it says, mountains will be, or hills will be melted like wax. V'hine, and behold, Or Hashem Ein Sof Baruch Hu Hamelubash B'Chochma Shebenefesh, the light of the Infinite One, blessed be He, that it comes into the level of Chachma in the soul. Gadol va'atzum kocho kol kach legaresh v'litchot asitcha achora v'aklipa שלא יוכלו ליגלו אפילו בלבושיו, שמחשב הדיבור הוא מעשה של אמונת השם אחד. Now, its power of the light of Hashem in the level of Chachma in the soul is so great to banish and rid of the other side and the impurities that they shouldn't even touch his garments, referring to his thought, speech, and action when it comes to faith in God and the one God. What does that mean practically? דהיינו לעמוד בניסיון למשוך נפשו אפילו שלא לעשות רק איזה מעשה לבד נגד אמונת השם אחד. That means to stand up the test, to sacrifice his soul, even not to do a certain act which is against the faith in one God. Like to bow down to an idol, to foreign worship. Even though he doesn't believe in it at all in his heart. Okay, even if he doesn't believe it in his heart, just to bow down, his soul won't allow him to do it. Again, like we said before, it's illogical because he has a test over here. Either bow down to the idol or be killed. But his soul won't let him do it, and he'll give himself up to be killed. Just not to do an action. Not to bow to an idol, and even if inside he doesn't believe it. Another expression of this, even also not to speak blasphemy on, God forbid, on the oneness of God, even if his mouth and his heart aren't equal. Instead, his heart is complete with the faith of Hashem. Just to do that, to speak in such a way that is against the faith in the one God, he will give his life up for that, in order not to do that. Now, this is the fear that is part of the love. It is absorbed in the love. It is included in the love. Okay, what are we talking about? What love? Which the love is the natural love in the godly soul, which is in the general populace of Israel. Which its desire and yearning naturally is to cleave and attach itself in its source in the light of the Infinite One, blessed be He. That because of this love and desire, it has a fear and a dread in its nature to touch even the slight edge of the impurity of idol worship, God forbid, which is against the belief in the one God. Afilu b'levushei hachitzoni, even if it's just in the external garments, shem dibur u'maaseh, which are speech and action, bli emuna b'lev klal, without any feeling of faith as such in the heart at all. The last point being that together with the love of the soul naturally to attach itself to God comes the fear of anything that goes against God, of course believing in something that's against the one God, even speaking or doing something that's against the one God, every Jew naturally has a fear of doing such. Thank you for joining, and I hope you enjoyed.